All right. Just to welcome to everyone into the Iscia Seminars Horizon 2055 series. We're on our fourth presentation of the year, and it's Dr. Anton Botha that is presenting today. So Anton is a well-known participant in our seminar series. He's been here often. And today he's talking about the dinner on the menu of tomorrow. And he holds a PhD in applied social sciences from Durham. He's worked as a psychologist for the UN, UNDP, UNICEF. He will take 10 minutes at the end of his presentation to talk about the psychological profile of the UN at the moment, post the American changes, or maybe we should do a different session on that. But Anton's focus today will be looking at what of the future is not just about what we eat, but who. He deals with a provocative short story in that presentation. So Anton, just a welcome to you and thank you for today's session, for taking us through. I'm going to hand over to you and off we go.
Thank you very much, Gary, and thank you very much for everybody joining today. So just a little background on this. In 2017, I injured my leg and I couldn't go to work. So I was stuck at home in my apartment in New York and bored out of my mind. I just picked up my laptop and started writing a short story. And this is off the back of having done a few writing courses at the Gotham Writers Club in New York. And with my free time, I kind of saw a confluence of a couple of trends in technology coming together. And so I sat down and I wrote this short story, which turned out not to be so short. So what I'm going to do is I'll cut out the first bit of the story, which is largely the introduction leading up to it. And I'm going to provide you just with a synopsis of what happened in the first part of the story. And then I'm going to read basically the second part, which is or excuse the pun, the meaty bit of the story. So just to give you the necessary context to understand that section then, our protagonist is Dr. Mary McCarran. She's a freelance journalist and philosopher and a reluctant clickbait queen. And she receives a strange hand-delivered invitation to an exclusive dinner hosted by a Silicon Valley billionaire named David Taggart. The invitation is as mysterious as it is elaborate, penned in calligraphy, accompanied by a first-class plane ticket, luxury hotel accommodation, and a veiled promise that your opinion is sought on a matter of some importance. So Taggart is known for his eccentric views and outsized influence in the tech world. He's one of these libertarian futurists whose name conjures both admiration and unease. And Mary, having recently published a viral piece on the ethics and environmental dangers of meat consumption, suspects the dinner may be related to this. We'll see if she's right or wrong about that. Despite every rational warning bell ringing in Mary's head, her curiosity gets the better of her. And so she takes this journey to San Francisco, and she finds herself checked into this lavish suites at the Fairmont Hotel, complete with her favorite flowers and a private tour of Alcatraz that's been personally arranged. Taggart, it seems, knows her better than she would like to admit, even though she'd never met him. And now she's driving to the residence. She prepares to meet her fellow guests, strangers like her, handpicked and flown from across the world to discover exactly what this dinner is about. So, without further ado, I'm going to dive in and I will read to you the final part of the story. The car pulled into a driveway when an enormous solid black metal gate blocked what lay beyond. There were no markings, no numbers, no signs around announcing who or what resided inside. The gate opened at a brisk pace on its tracks, and the car advanced itself onto a pitch-black tarred road extending about half a mile to a small structure built on the edge of a Pacific cliff. There was no effort at gardening. The vegetation was as it would naturally occur in that part of the world. At first glance, Mary saw only a somewhat unimpressive small concrete single-story structure at the edge of the cliff. The structure consisted entirely of concrete and glass arranged symmetrically. From her limited knowledge of architecture, Mary knew it was built in a style called brutalism. The place had a raw aesthetic about it. It was modern in the way things of the 1950s were designed modern. The design captured something about the desire for the future. The car stopped in front of the main entrance. A woman stood on the pathway, her person illuminated by the almost extinguished sun and the metallic glow of the LEDs leading to the front door. She donned a creamed bodycon dress which extended below her knees, matching cream heels and blonde hair pulled back in a strict bun. Her build was muscular and athletic. She moved with the grace of a ballerina. After Mary exited the car, the woman extended her hand and introduced herself. Her smile perked the corners of her mouth to a perfect 30-degree angle without allowing her lips to part. "Winslow Wayne, Dr. McCarran, we are so pleased you made it." As Mary extended her hand, she observed how this was one of those rare occasions when the voice she heard over the phone almost exactly matches the mental picture she had of that person. "You must be parched after your journey," Winslow said rather ironically. "Please follow me to join the other guests." As Winslow turned, Mary took note of how tall she was. She could easily have been an Olympian athlete. Taggart must have a thing for the Ubermensch, Mary thought. If any event was being hosted, the exterior of the residence did little to belay this fact. There were no other cars and barely any lights outside. The front door was plain black metal with no sign on the door or a handle that was visible. At the entrance, Mary noticed a brown carpet door match which read "Ipso postio erudi foras." From a limited varsity Latin, Mary discerned "ipso postio" as referring to assumptions or something like that, but she couldn't make the rest out. The door opened automatically as the pair approached. Inside was a sizable cylinder made of brushed stainless steel, complemented by a glass interior, an elevator by Mary's estimation. Winslow gestured her to enter. Once inside, it began its journey without prompt. When it stopped, Mary was greeted with a magnificent view of the sun disappearing over the Pacific. It became clear that the entire house was built into the cliff, with the top the mere tip of the iceberg, so to speak. The entire western wall was floor-to-ceiling glass that did not obscure a single inch of the view. There were no visible window frames or seams. Mary concluded that this may have been the largest continuous piece of glass she'd ever seen in her life. The interior itself was more welcoming than she expected, despite it being roomy and sparsely furnished. Mary had visited the odd home of millionaires in Manhattan, the kinds of homes furnished to impress, which are typically stuffed full of French antiques, Persian rugs, and name-brand art, decals that serve more to confront guests with the owner's wealth rather than any kind of aesthetic taste. This space did the opposite. Every object seemed to have a purpose, a place, and worked to create a unified design. Mary followed Winslow to a wide floating wooden staircase that ascended one story to yet another expansive floor. The massive space shared the same signature window as the floor above, with its furniture arranged roughly divided into three segments. Towards the north, there was a lounge area with floor-sunken seating, at the center of which was a floating fireplace, almost like those you'd see in a 70s ski lodge. In the center was a reception space, designated by a large Nordic rug. Three cocktail tables, uniform, white, sleek, and slender, created a mingled triangle. Mary spotted a dinner table in the southern corner, perfectly set for six. As she followed Winslow to the small group of people at the reception area, she mentally absorbed her surroundings, including several enormous pieces of art that almost entirely filled the eastern wall. Each of the used pieces was an abstract wonder, the likes of which she had never seen, bold works representing substantial artistic talent. One piece in particular was somewhat out of place. It was an astronaut gazing over a dramatic blank expanse of an uninhabited planet, a wrench in one hand and a smartphone in the other. "Everyone, may I have your attention for a moment? Our final guest has arrived. May I introduce you to Dr. Mary McCarran, a freelance journalist and part-time philosopher from New York. Mary, these are your fellow guests. May I introduce you to Tony Carson, Keith Chung, Winston Glass, and Santosh Kumar." Hello, everyone. A pleasure to meet you. Mary did her best to not do what she usually does, which is to instantly forget the names of people she has just been introduced to. She tried to trick that she had read online by associating the person's name with an object and then imagining that person with it. She got as far as imagining Tony was a tomcat on a lap before Winslow interrupted her. Drink, Miss McCarran? Anything you like. A guest is yet to stump us. Mary scanned the other hands to see what they were having. There seemed to be no consistency. One had what appeared to be a gin and tonic, the other a glass of wine, and Santosh seemed to be nursing a cocktail of some description. Might as well go for it. Well, let's see. I'll have a Boulier rye bourbon with ice chips and a splash of lime cordial. You got it, Winslow said. She made no movements that indicated she was getting her drink. However, mere moments later, a waiter appeared from behind a door between the artworks with a tumbler filled almost to the brim with ice chips, rye bourbon, and a generous splash of lime cordial, exactly the way Mary liked it. Winslow inquired whether the drink was to Mary's liking, to which she simply nodded after the first sip. Before she could utter thank you, Winslow had vanished. A bit disconcerting, isn't it? Said Winston, approaching Mary as she took a deep, satisfying sip. He was wearing a white button-down shirt, jeans, herringbone sports blazer, and a stylish slip-on, along with what looked like an ethnic scarf of some description. Mary couldn't make out where exactly the scarf could have been from, maybe Mongolia or Nepal, but it was evidently being worn to relay the fact that Winston was a worldly man. Mary responded, attempting not to choke on the ice tip she had just swallowed. A tad disconcerting indeed. I have decided to suspend my suspicions for the sake of figuring out the true purpose of this evening. It would seem Taggart has done his homework, or at least someone in his employ did. I had a private tour of Alcatraz yesterday. There was literally no one else there. Winston, it sounds to me like you've made peace with what I can only conclude is an invasion of our privacy. How else could he have possibly known such obscure peculiarities about us? Mary, I wouldn't go so far as to call it a peace. Let's call it a ceasefire. We do owe his a debt of gratitude for all he's done for us so far. Winston, I suppose you're right. I flew first class from London, a luxury not often afforded to a journalist such as myself. Winston's face had a sun-swept, weathered look about it, which Mary knew was unobtainable living full-time in London. Connections began to form in her mind. Was this Winston Glass, the journalist who managed to reverse both the left and right-leaning publications? She had read articles he published in The Guardian as well as the Financial Times and Economist, a rare feat in today's age of media echo chambers. Mary decided not to make the fact that she was a great admirer of his work known for fear the conversation would steer in the direction of her own writing. Mary, I don't suppose you know what this is all about, do you? I'm afraid I'm as clueless as you, Mary. My digging on Taggart only ever uncovered rumor and innuendo. Tony, are you two gossiping about our host? She said, approaching Mary and Winston, vodka, lime, and soda in hand. She had a bottle blonde hair and looked like she belonged on a couch at Fox and Friends. Her red cocktail dress left little to the imagination. Both Mary and Winston had to deliberately avert their gaze in a more northerly direction to avoid being caught in an inappropriate stare. Tommy, I read in a forum that Taggart is gay, which would explain why he's unattached, I guess. But let's put that to the test, shall we? Is it your intention to seduce Taggart? Mary asked quite directly, even surprising herself. Tommy, no, merely to test the theory with all the means at my disposal. Are you a journalist, Tommy? Asked Winston in an attempt to divert a conversation that was rapidly becoming awkward. Heavens no. I do work in media, though. I have a podcast. You may have heard of it. It's called The Days. I basically call those liberal types on their lefty nonsense and set out agendas for the conservative youth of this great freedom-loving country. Mary now recognized Tommy. She had turned into a few of Tommy's podcasts on issues of freedoms of speech and honoring the flag, etc. Each episode left Mary's blood boiling, so she stopped listening. Hailing from a well-to-do family in Texas, Tommy was quick-witted, smart, and the embodiment of white Americana. Everything Mary, an East Coast liberal, has come to loathe in the post-Trump world they now lived in. Well, pleasure to meet you, Mary lied. Mary became aware of a presence next to her and turned to meet Taggart's gaze. He didn't enter the room as much as he appeared in it, unannounced and unceremonious. Good evening, everyone. I'm so pleased you could all come to join me here in my home tonight. I hope to be a consummate host to you all. The guest was still mid-sentence when Taggart uttered these words. Most did a double take to confirm it was, in fact, him. As the realization set in across the room, so did an atmosphere of silence and singular focus. Most of you have traveled great distances to be here tonight. For that, I thank you. I know you must be curious as to the reason I brought you here. In this regard, I ask that you bear with me just a few moments longer. What I can be transparent about is that it is my intention to pick every one of your minds bare over the course of this evening. Everyone present here tonight has a unique perspective to add to our discussion, and I don't mean that in the everybody's opinion matters kind of way. No, it is your expert and informed opinions I'm after in a matter that goes to the very core of our civilization, perhaps our very existence. Therefore, please speak plainly, but with forethought. Tonight, you will be asked to wander off the reservation of your comfort zones. For some of you, this may evoke powerful emotions. I implore you to overcome these reactions and consider all matters rationally. After all, as I'm sure you will all agree, it is our capacity for self-reflective, rational thought that sets us apart from all the other species on this planet. As Taggart was delivering his welcome remarks, Mary noticed he was shorter than she imagined. Unsurprisingly, Taggart was wearing his signature outfit, which admittedly looked good on him. Mary got the impression that even the jeans he was wearing may have been tailored. None of his clothing had label or insignia of any kind. What was more striking was that it was hard to gauge Taggart's age based off his face. His skin was pale and wax-like. There were no signs of wrinkles, liver spots, or even freckles. His forehead and cheeks had a smooth topography which seemed unnatural. At first, Mary assumed plastic surgery, Botox, or combination of both. However, having watched his face nimbly change expression with remarkable dexterity, she concluded that her first assumption was misplaced. Even though Taggart's exact birthday wasn't in the public record, Mary extrapolated that he was in his 60s. However, Taggart had the appearance of a man in his early 40s, albeit one that rarely saw the sun. His chestnut hair also showed no signs of receding. In fact, he had a head of hair you would expect to see of him in a man in his 30s. Turns out the fountain of youth wasn't a place after all. It was just a large enough bank account, Mary thought. Before we take a seat at the dinner table, let's all enjoy a drink, and I will ask the chef to send out some canapes to fend off any urgent hunger pangs. While you enjoy little Wagyu treats our chef has prepared, I would like to connect with each of you before we dine. His voice had a presence that was hard to ignore. He spoke softly. However, every word landed as intended. It was as if the room became quieter to make sure what he said was fully absorbed. Another waiter appeared with a silver tray from behind the eastern wall. He made his way to Mary and Winston and offered them a canapé. Twirled inside a hollowed-out, fresh, bite-sized shiitake mushroom were perfectly medium-rare strips of steak, caramelized on the outside, pink on the inside, topped with a drizzle of black truffle oil and whole mustard seed. Mary gingerly picked up one of these off the tray and made it disappear in one bite. The ensemble complemented each other like a string quartet, and they were playing the most beautiful music for her taste buds. Mary saw Winston experience a similar reaction, eyes rolling back as he bit into his. Goodness, that was delightful, Mary felt compelled to declare. Winston simply nodded in agreement. As the tray made its way around the room, Mary observed that both Santosh and Keith declined their offer of a canapé. Mary excused herself from Winston and made her way to Santosh, who was still nursing his cocktail. He looked a bit out of sorts by Mary's estimation. He appeared to be South Asian and was wearing a black suit with a mandarin collar that complemented his jet black hair. Mary, she introduced herself. Santosh, he replied with half a smile. She continued, for a host who seemed so well organized when it came to our travel and accommodation arrangement, it seems he may have neglected to make inquiries about our dietary restrictions. An unfortunate oversight, I assume, said Santosh. Beef wouldn't usually appear on any menu I had a choice over, but I am sure provisions have been made in the event a vegetarian such as myself makes an appearance. I'm sure our host has made the necessary arrangements. As a matter of interest, what do you do, Santosh? I write for one of India's Sunday newspapers on social and cultural issues. I also quite active on social media in India. I have little over 10 million followers on various platforms. Not as impressive as it sounds in a country with 1.4 billion, though. I imagine you have quite the readership in your paper. A modest 100 million by our last circulation estimates. Mary was equal parts impressed and bemused by these numbers. She was lucky if she got a few 100,000 reads, never mind a million. Mary, forgive me for my ignorance, but what do you write about? Oh, Santosh. Forgiveness is not necessary. I mostly provide social commentary on the emergence of India's middle and upper middle classes. I try and warn about the excesses of consumerism, and I've written a thing or two on animal rights. Mary, oh, sounds interesting. Coincidentally, this is also a topic I've written on. Santosh, I take it from Winslow's introduction that you're also a journalist. Mary, in a manner of speaking, most of my work is, well, how to put it, aimed at a commercial market, better known as clickbait. Santosh, clickbait. No shame in making money from your craft, Mary. Besides, I'm sure Taggart wouldn't have invited you if he didn't have something interesting to offer. Mary, I hope so. I just knew what that was. Santosh, well, that makes two of us. It took some persuading to get me to come. I really don't travel well, and with a firm purpose for this visit so well hidden, I was reluctant to come, but in the end, my curiosity got the better of me. Mary, same here. With that, Taggart tapped Mary on the shoulder. Dr. McCarran, so glad you could make it. I wanted to personally thank you for indulging me with your presence tonight, given the admittedly mysterious nature of our invitation. I hope your travel and accommodation have somewhat made up for it. No trouble at all, Mr. Taggart. I hope by the end of this evening the mystery will be resolved and it will all have been worth it. I guarantee it will be, Miss Karen. I guarantee it will be, he repeated himself. Mary didn't much know what else to say to Taggart. The manners taught to her by her mother kicked in, and she thanked him for his invitation and told him he had a lovely home. It felt a bit odd standing next to one of America's richest men. It wasn't as intimidating as she expected, and her nature as a journalist awoke a drive in her to pepper him with questions. However, Mary held back as she was anticipating a long evening ahead. Will you all please join me at the dinner table? Taggart announced, waving the 5 guests in the direction of the place settings with a smile. You'll find a name card on the table where you'll be seated. Mary was seated on the south side of the table with Keith to her right and adjacent to Taggart at the head of the table. Keith was a young, tall, Asian man that wore a slim grey-cut suit with a skinny silver tie and a white shirt. He had a fresh look about him, like a character off the streets of Hong Kong, making his way to an upper middle-class management position at a private equity bank. His hair had some sort of product in it that made it appear wet and locked it in place. He seemed to have a rather neutral disposition on his face, which made his mood hard to discern. Mary, she extended her hand in Keith's direction. Keith returned the gesture with a firm handshake, bowing his head, but said nothing in return. All the guests were now positioned behind their chairs, Tommy at the eastern head of the table, and Winston was seated opposite Mary, allowing for direct eye contact. Taggart signaled for them to sit, as if he were eager to dispense with formalities and get down to the true business of this evening. The table itself was set with fine crystal stemware, gold-plated cutlery, and gold-rimmed white plates. Mary usually found gold to be a crass decoration, but it was subtle enough to avoid that label in this instance. The place settings were black, and the tablecloth was a virgin white. There was a low but beautiful flower arrangement in the middle of the table. She recognized the flowers as proteas, only flowers she'd seen in pictures. Flown all the way from South Africa. What a carbon footprint that decoration must have, Mary thought. A waiter once more appeared from around the corner, sporting a bottle of white wine. He circled the table, making sure that everybody got a tasting measure. Mary's glass frosted up almost immediately as the cold liquid settled in the delicate crystal vessel. I trust you are all comfortable, and please don't hesitate to ask for anything should you need it. You are about to enjoy some of the most delicious and intriguing courses you will have ever tasted. That much I can promise you. Our meal has been carefully prepared by Chef Juan Malman. And as those of you with an interest in fine dining probably know, Chef Juan hails from Argentina, but has worked in renowned fine dining establishments the world over and has no less than 3 Michelin stars under his belt. He is considered by many in the world the world's most prominent meat chef. He has been in my employ for a while now, working on tonight's menu. I trust you will enjoy this meal. Also, before you start, I hope none of you have any objections to me recording our conversations this evening. Mary looked at her fellow guests one by one, but no one seemed to react to Taggart's request. Great. I take it from your silence that you are fine with it. Taggart? now turned his attention to Keith and Santosh, who were sitting on opposite sides of the table furthest from Taggart. On a somewhat related note, I trust no one here has any objections to eating meat. I couldn't help but notice some of you didn't partake in the canapes that were brought around earlier. Santosh spoke up first. Forgive me, but I'm a vegetarian. Keith followed on Santosh's comments and echoed the statement. I'm a vegetarian as well. I hope this won't present a problem this evening. Taggart continued, it is my understanding that both of you are vegetarian for moral rather than religious reasons. Is that correct? This time, Keith spoke up first. That would be correct. The greenhouse emissions from meat production is simply indefensible in this time of climate crisis. While I ate meat growing up, I stopped. And as you would have read from my publications, both in academia and the popular press, I strongly advocate others to do the same. If every person in China started eating meat like you do in America, this planet has little hope. Mary was surprised by the directness of Keith's response. It was delivered politely yet forcefully with more than a bit of subtext. Santosh cleared his throat and took a sip of water before saying, I too used to eat meat. However, having witnessed the horrors of industrial scale farming, I too gave up meat for moral and environmental reasons. And like Keith, I've used my platforms to advocate for others to do the same. India cannot afford to become a meat-eating nation like you in the West. The sentient experience of animals is also hard to ignore, while the environmental impact would be catastrophic. I too have written extensively on this topic, and if you would forgive me, but I'm a bit surprised, given your level of organization, that you didn't know this. Mary started to spot a trend. She remembered reading a piece Winston wrote for The Guardian on meat consumption. Taggart chimed back, you are forgiven. Did you notice the doormat on the way in? Make no assumptions in this house. Why did you assume that what you were being served had either negative environmental impact or sentient experience? Santos, you said we were being served beef, no? You were. And I assure you, Winston, Mary, and Tommy can confirm what they ate was in fact beef. Tommy started nodding in agreement as Taggart continued to speak. However, the meat they ate was never part of a sentient animal and was produced using renewable energy. The meat was grown, much like a plant, using a combination of the latest organic three-dimensional printing technology, stem cell science, and very advanced application of cell biology. We have even perfected the introduction of fat cells, making the meat taste no different from what you would get from an animal. In fact, you may even consider it an improved version. We can make 3D printed marbling. We can set the level of tenderness by playing with cell ratios. Truly, the sky is the limit. Winston and Mary immediately shared a glance with each other, the kind of what glance you give somebody you've had a weird experience with. Taggart looked at Keith and Santosh now sitting in silence. It would seem to me that given your both professed love of meat and gave it up for noble reasons, you can now again enjoy it, as everything I'm serving tonight had no sentience and had very, very little environmental footprint. With that, three people dressed as waiters appeared from behind the door of the eastern wall carrying two plates, each covered in silver torches. Using the formal French dinner service style, each plate was placed in front of a guest delivered over the appropriate shoulder. In coordination, they removed the covers to reveal a beautifully arranged plate with small strips of white meat and some greens and two deconstructed string beans. There was a smear of orange sauce that looked like a comet streaking across the plate. One of the waiters announced in a thick French accent, while making eye contact with each one of the guests, Madame and Monsieur, this evening's aperitif, we are serving fresh beans, inverted string beans, and the breast of a dodo. It is served with a chilled Sauvignon Blanc from Chateau Margaux. Please enjoy. Mary looked at Taggart with some surprise and simply repeated the word, dodo? Taggart grinned. Yes, well, yes, dodo. Mary, as in the Mauritian flightless bird that went extinct over 100 years ago? Well, you see, it occurred to me that to grow meat with the technology available to us, all you need are the building blocks, the most fundamental of which is DNA. As it turns out, dodo DNA is available. Oxford University still has some tissue left in its Natural History Museum, and all it cost me was a modest donation to their business school. Well, to make a long story short, I managed, so here we are. The six of us will be the first people in over a century to eat dodo. From all accounts by the French sailors, they're meant to be quite tasty, so please enjoy. There was a moment of awkward looks around the table. Taggart picked up his knife and fork, cut the meat, draped it in the sauce, put it in his mouth, chewing while looking at nothing in particular, and swallowed while the rest was simply staring. He took a sip of his wine and announced, "That's honestly more delicious than I anticipated. Please try. I'd love to hear your opinion." Everyone around the table exchanged a glance with each other in an unscripted and in unscripted coordination picked up their knives and forks and started eating in silence. Mary took her first bite as if the meat contained fine bones. However, upon landing on her tongue, all apprehension disappeared. It was moist, tasted like an improved version of chicken, and was flavorful in all the right ways. There was no apprehension with the second bite. Mary could observe everyone else eating the 2 or 3 bites of dodo they had on their plates. Keith and Santosh ate in silence, while Tommy did an annoying sound after each bite. Mary hated to admit it, but Tommy's moans of joy were warranted. The dish was fantastic. Winston and Mary did their best to hide the fact that they were enjoying this exotic dodo dish a little bit too much. Upon finishing his plate, Winston piped up, smiling. "What's next, Taggart? Woolly mammoth?" Funny you should mention that, Winston. We've obtained the DNA, but we are still working on perfecting the meat. Seems getting the muscle texture right for such a large animal is harder than anticipated. We are working with the University of Moscow that possesses a sample that they discovered still frozen from the last ice age. However, sadly, DNA only has a half-life of about half a millennia, so we'll have to make some educated guesses along the way. My hope is when you come over again, you and I will enjoy some mammoth steaks. Mary, so that's the big secret then? You're going to disrupt the meat industry and start selling extinct animal products? Disrupt, yes, in a sense. Taggart nodded. I like to think of it more as a reimagining of our relationship with meat, rethinking the boundaries of what is taboo and what is not. As the conversation continued, waiters reappeared, 2 clearing the plates, while the third reset the table for the next course. A waiter again filled the table's wine glasses, this time with a light Pinot Noir from California. Taggart continued, "That is one of the things I simply adore about science. The more it advances, the more taboos fall, the freer we become as a species. I see it as an advancement as our species every time we overturn one of these taboos. The contraceptive pill allowed for the fall of the sexual double standard. Organ transplants allowed us to overcome the sanctity of the human body. In vitro fertilization completely redefined parenthood for us. Taboos fall all the time and we march forward." The waiters once again appeared with silver cloches and did their little coordinated dance around the table, meticulously placing the plates and in unison revealing its content. Again, the waiter described the contents of the dish: a serving of potatoes and leek puree with a slice of the thigh of Marilyn Monroe, prepared in Hungarian paprika, Dijon, forest honey, and the drizzle with an essence of clove sauce. This time it was Tommy's mouth that dropped. Did he just say the thigh of Marilyn Monroe, the actress, the human being? Taggart simply nodded without uttering a word. Santosh looked at his plate in disgust. "This is human meat. Cannibalism. You want us to engage in cannibalism?" Taggart took a sip of his wine and simply whispered, "Why not? We use the same methods as with the other meats. No sentience. The person in question is no longer with us. The DNA was legally obtained at auction." Winston pushed his plate to one side, responding, "Well, I can think of at least 3 good reasons why this is absurd. Firstly, it must be illegal. Secondly, this can't be healthy. And finally, it is simply immoral. It is one of the taboos virtually every culture agrees on." Well, allow me to correct you on those if you'll permit me. Firstly, in the state of California, where we currently find ourselves, it is not illegal to eat human flesh, while murder, grievous bodily harm, and desecrating a corpse are. However, we have done none of the latter. Secondly, I assume you're talking about the human form of mad cow's disease that the natives of Papua New Guinea suffered from when they ate their enemies or their relatives. Well, that comes from a transmittable bacteria, and I can assure you that in our lab control environment, this meat was grown in, there is a 0% chance of any of that being a risk. And third, I would simply say I disagree with your particular brand of conventional morality. Mary, you're the philosopher. Are we being immoral eating old Marilyn here? Mary was still stunned and in a semi state of daydreaming. But what she had heard moments ago and had hardly paid attention to the conversation. Moral, well, yes, well, no. Taggart, perhaps you would like to gather your thoughts, Mary. Take your time. Mary, after a pause, continued, but cautiously. Well, morality in the broadest philosophical sense is a human construct, a system of values where we've built to reduce harm and maintain social cohesion, but it's never fixed. What was once moral, slavery, public executions, even child labor, is now abhorrent. And the reverse is true also. As our understanding evolves, so does our morality. She glanced at the others before continuing. Utilitarians like Mills would argue that no sentient being is harmed and the net happiness is increased, then the act is justifiable, even moral. And for constructivists like Proshgard, morality isn't discovered, it's made, shaped by reason and context. So if the meat wasn't sourced through suffering, if consent was given and no real harm is done, then, well, I can't think of a good reason why we can't. She takes a deep sip of her wine. I suppose what I'm saying is moral taboos have always fallen to science and reason. Perhaps this one is next. Taggart, smiling. Spoken like a true philosopher, Mary. Tomi's mouth was still open at this point, and she simply muttered under her breath that this was unchristian. What was that, Tomi? Taggart asked. Do you have something to add? Well, I think it's unchristian, the eating of human flesh. It's against the teachings of the Bible. How is it now? Would you care to tell me where exactly it says so? The thing is, I looked, and while the Bible states prohibitions against murder and grave desecration, there is nothing on eating the flesh of a human. Of course, some religious scholars argue it can be inferred, but then again, almost anything can be from what's largely a metaphorical book. So I'm not accepting that as gospel. In fact, one could argue that millions of Christians engage in cannibalism every time they take Mass. The bread and wine, after all, the trans manifestation of the body of Christ. It would seem to me that rather than prohibit our meal, it encouraged by your faith. Keith chipped in. That doesn't change the fact that this is wrong. You cannot eat the flesh of another human, full stop. Taggart, please give me one good reason why not. As I mentioned before, this is legal. No harm was caused. The person in question no longer lives. She has no heirs, and her DNA was legally obtained. What rational reason can you give me? It seems to me your response is rather more affective than rational, which, given the level of surprise, is perhaps to be expected, but I will make you this wager. If any of you can think of a compelling rational reason not to eat a bite of marrow, I will give each of you $1 million. But if you can't, you should at least try. Santosh, it is unnatural and therefore unhealthy for the human body to consume human protein. We don't know the long-term effects of eating the meat of another human. Taggart, good one, Santosh, but wrong again. There's no scientific basis for your argument. You digest protein, not DNA, while your tongue might be able to, your digestive system cannot tell the difference between two species. Because of our laboratory-controlled environment, we can scale the proteins to fat ratios for optimal health. We have also studied the long-term effects of this practice, and contrary to your hypothesis, human eating meat actually demonstrates health benefits. And besides, the small portion in front of you is highly unlikely to impact your health in any meaningful way. Winston, but what about the psychological well-being? I mean, you're asking us to eat the meat of another human. What about the long-term trauma? Taggart, this is hardly a war zone, Winston. You all have free will here. But I think if you did some soul searching, you'll find that your apprehension lies in your conventional moralities and perhaps a bit of conditioning. There's no logical basis for this to be a traumatic experience. Think of it as a unique culinary exploration, thanks to what is likely to be the most expensive meal you'll ever eat. With that, Taggart unceremoniously cut the piece of meat on his plate and ate it. He nodded with approval and drank a sip of wine. Quite delicious, he declared. Give it a try. With that, Santosh picked up his cutlery and said, I have to admit it, he's right. There's no good reason why not. With that, Santosh cut a piece and placed it on his tongue, taking only one bite. He let Marilyn rest on his tongue. To Mary, it appeared he was pondering whether he should continue with the next bite or violently spit it out in a reversal of his decision. To her surprise, and after some pause, Santosh's jaw started moving, as rhythmically as he began chewing. This was preceded by a swallow and a sip of wine. The rest of the table simply observed him in utter silence. And, asked Winston, well, all I can say is, to my utter disappointment, is that Miss Monroe is quite delicious. Objectively speaking, this is one of the best things I've tasted in my life. Mary stared at her plate. It was also perfect, and the pleasant aroma of cloves floated around her like a thin mist of a holiday kitchen. How often do you legally get to be a cannibal, she thought. Her hands seemed to go for her knife and fork as if on autopilot. She was nervous, to be sure, but oddly excited as well. She cut the meat on her plate and placed a small piece on her tongue. She hesitated for a moment and gave second thought to spitting it out. But the flavors were so good, and she started chewing by reflex. It was one of the best things Mary had tasted in her life. Better than steak, better than pork, better than sex with her ex. Fuck, she thought. Marilyn Monroe is delicious. Based on Mary's expression, Winston took a small, curious bite. He too seemed to come to the same conclusion. Now Santosh, Mary, and Winston were all eating their meal with Taggart like any other. Small cuts loaded onto forks, interspersed with sips of wine. There was an odd silence, one only momentarily broken by the scrape of a knife against the plate. Tommy and Keith were sitting in silence, mouth open at the spectacle they were witnessing. Tommy managed only to lift a jaw to utter, "This is complete madness. You've all gone mad." Taggart retorted, "It would seem to me that you are the one that is mad. After all, what is madness but the absence of reason? And you, Tommy, are not acting rationally now." Like an obedient child, Tommy picked up her cutlery and started eating her portion as if a plate of steamed vegetables. However, after the first bite, her disposition changed as well. Mary observed the same unfortunate enjoyment she herself lived mere moments ago. Keith was the only one left still. "Give it a try, Keith," Taggart suggested. Keith too succumbed to the pressure. Mary got the impression that despite his best efforts, he could not conceive a rational reason not to. He too was now experiencing the delicate flesh yielding to the pressure created by his teeth during the act of chewing. The delicious flavors releasing themselves only to spill over taste buds in a carnival of delights for every bite. Before long, all the plates were empty. Mary thought for a moment, God, we are now all cannibals. We have eaten the flesh of another human being. Classical music started to play in the background, softly but audibly. Wagner, if Mary wasn't mistaken, Triumph of the Soul. "Well, congratulations on overcoming your irrational apprehensions. I must admit I was betting at least one of you would tap out, but here we are. Are you ready for your final course?" "So was that your plan with us? You want to sell dead celebrities to the public?" asked Winston. "Well, yes, but live ones too, with their permission, of course. The world will be eating their favorite celebrities soon. There will be dinner parties where you can dine on your favorite actors, singers, and athletes. The Kardashians have already agreed to sell me their DNA in return for a royalty. Soon, Kim Kardashian bacon will be available to order along with a catalog of other celebrities. At a price, of course. It will be exclusive to start with. I have some celebrity chefs ready to cook up Jennifer Aniston and Jennifer Lawrence. Dine with Jen, we're calling it. This will become a new multi-billion-dollar industry, and I, alone, will pioneer it." While Taggart was pontificating his vision, the table was once more cleared, and what was now starting to feel like a ritual repeating itself. 6 more plates appeared, 6 more plates covered in the now familiar silver cloches. The lids were once more lifted in a choreographed fashion to reveal 6 more portions. At this point, Mary was starting to feel a bit tipsy from her wine, which she had been sipping with increased frequency. However, she was laser-focused as Taggart continued. "Oh, and there's of course one more course this evening. You." Mary looked around the table and noticed that everybody had something different on their plates. She had what looked like a small square of pork belly on her plate, while Winston had what appeared to be carpaccio on his. Keith looked like a piece of loin covered in sesame seed, artistically overlaid in what appeared to be crispy noodles. Tommy just looked like a smoked piece of cutlet, while Santosh had a delicate strip of meat resting over beautifully pressed short grain rice. Taggart's plate seemed to have small portions of all these dishes. Mary was still reeling from the prior course, having not really registered what Taggart had meant by "you." Winston was the only one with the wherewithal to ask, what do you mean, you? Well, how to put it, the meat in front of you comes from your DNA. You have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to try a bit of yourself at no cost or injury. This time, everyone at the table's mouths dropped, and it seemed to be a collective what the fuck telepathically communicated between every guest present as they shared glances. Tommy, we never gave you permission. What on earth? This is outrageous. This is simply outrageous. Keith, now look here, Taggart. This has gone too far. You stole our DNA. This will be reported to the authorities. This is criminal. Well, actually, each of you gave me permission to do this. You may not have remembered or have realized at the time, but that's half the beauty of terms and conditions. Mary, what do you mean terms and conditions? We never signed anything to attend this party. Taggart, well, you did. See, admittedly, it was a while ago, but all of you did. Winston, speak plainly, Taggart. When would we have agreed to something like this? Never in a million years. Winston, Mary, Santosh, Keith, and Tommy, did you not all do 23andMe DNA tests? Did you not voluntarily send your DNA to this company, a company of which I am a controlling shareholder and member of the board? Did you not all agree to the terms and conditions when you sent off your sample, which under paragraph 14, subsection 5 states, we are entitled to use your DNA for any purpose we, i.e. I, see fit? This simply can't be legal, Keith protested. Not according to my lawyers, and I can assure you I have a very expensive one. Chef One spent weeks perfecting a recipe to go with each of your unique flavor profiles. You're going to love it, I promise. We can't eat ourselves, vocalized Tommy. This is beyond. Tommy was now at a loss for words. Taggart gave Tommy pause, some room, but sensing a continuation was not coming, he filled the silence. Why not? Every day you digest millions of your own cells. It's part of the body's natural processes. What's that, Taggart? With that, Taggart took a small bite of a piece that matched Tommy's plate. I particularly enjoy your flavor, Tommy. I could really taste the Nordic in you. Santosh, you're quite tasty as well. Exotic, if you'll forgive the stereotype. Winston, you on the other hand, I'm not such a huge fan of, although Chef Juan insists he likes you best of all. Keith, I'm afraid the same goes for you. However, Mary, you are my favorite. I'm even thinking that I may want to offer you your own meat deal. Mary's belly, we'll call it. Taste the perfect blend of European. This is beyond the pale, Taggart, Winston protested. Why? Aren't you a little curious? Do we have to go over the moral, legal, and health arguments with you again, Winston? Take a moment to process your emotional response and think about this rationally. I'm giving you a unique opportunity here. This, I can assure you, is the most expensive meal you'll ever eat. Growing your individual cuts cost me a small fortune. Maybe it was because Mary was in a state of shock, but she did, as she had 2 times before, picked up her knife and fork, cut a small cube of meat and loaded it onto a fork. Mary was about to take a bite of her own flesh and could think of no good reason not to. Perched on the edge of her fork was a cube of meat glazed in a blood orange sauce beautifully prepared by a renowned world chef. Until moments ago, Mary had no idea what she was about to consume. Until moments ago, Mary couldn't have imagined this dinner party getting any stranger. How wrong she was. It tasted like a mild version of pork. It was tender, juicy, and flavorful. In a word, delicious. Mary gave the portion in her mouth 2 or 3 bites before she swallowed. And honestly, it was all it needed. It was so soft. What a cliche food writer would describe as melt in your mouth. Mary hated to admit it, but Taggart was right. She was delicious, and given the opportunity, she'd probably eat herself again. One by one, Mary noticed the others pick up their cutlery and started to make small incisions into themselves. One by one, they loaded their forks and took bites, each taking the first step into a new realm of consumption. What a surreal experience, this is, she thought, almost wishing this was a nightmare she could awake herself from. With that, Taggart quipped, excellent, I can see you all enjoying this course. No surprise, really. Why would you not enjoy yourself? It's eating something you truly love. That phrase, enjoy yourself, Mary thought, had never taken on that particular meaning in human history. Now, I know this event has left you all with a lot to process, and I know this will take you some time to come to terms with. It is, after all, unique in human history, but with the passage of time, I think you will come to see things my way on this issue, and you will have an opportunity to write and talk about it. While you may have some opinions on this, I would urge you to remain factual about the legality, morality, and science. You are the first witnesses to a turning point in our history as a species, the overturning of one of the world's oldest taboos. He continued, before you leave today, Winslow will provide you with press packs explaining the science and the legalities of all of this. It should ease some of the burden of your own research. However, feel free to independently verify your findings. Now, dessert, anyone? Taggart uttered with a grin. The end.
Anton, thank you very much. That's not a short story I expected, but yeah, I mean, in terms of madness being the absence of reason, it poses the question of what is moral, I suppose, and where, if you could grow your own food in that way, where no sentience is harmed, there's little environmental presence, and you have the permission, why not?
Well, it was interesting when I was writing it, it was sort of really when this whole laboratory grown meat movement was starting and becoming, more known. And then obviously the emergence of Ancestry.com and 23andMe. And then it just sort of occurred to me, hang on a minute, what if those two industries intersected and there's some crazy private equity firm that buys up both of these companies that makes lab-grown meat and owns everyone's DNA? Who's stopping them from doing
Yeah.
this? So
No,
I
but
guess
exactly.
when I wrote the story, it was a little bit like Mary Shelley's story, writing it as a warning. So by no means am I condoning Taggart's views. It's just at the moment, without any kind of existing regulations, and I did up a bit of reading while I was writing this, there's actually nothing preventing people from doing this.
Yeah. I mean, that's fascinating. Anton, let's just see if there's anyone else who'd like to ask a question before we continue. Anyone who'd like to pose a question to Anton or just a response to the story?
Yeah, I'd love to hear your views.
So, I mean, the one question whilst people think about it is that you've deliberately chosen characters that come from sort of social media journalists. Is that deliberate or?
Yeah, so in the first half of the story, it sort of plants the seeds or the idea that Taggart wants to use them as a means to market
Market?
this
Yes.
product, and that they are the ones who are going to break down these legal and moral taboos for him by writing articles explaining that actually, this is perfectly fine to do, and there's no reason not to. I see we've got some hands up. Richard.
Yeah, go for it, Richard.
Sorry, I'm just turning my everything on. Can you hear me?
We can,
We
yes.
can, yes.
Okay, yeah. So, geez, what the hell? But yeah, CJD or Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease is not bacterial. It's got nothing. It's not bacterial transmission. But anyway. But I'm sure in your lab that you're talking about it, they could eliminate that anyway. So, but yeah, that's my only comment.
Okay, thank you. Good notes.
Thanks, Richard. Alex?
Yeah, thanks, Anton. That was delightful. As someone who's about to go on a hike with you deep into the wilderness, I'm curious about your thoughts. No, a more serious question. Maybe it's kind of connected. There's the movement for veganism, or those that would dumpster dive and perhaps even scavenge off freshly killed animals. And one wonders if there isn't a whole bunch of wasted human meat of the people that have died. Of course, when people die, they tend to have illnesses that maybe would make them unpalatable. But perhaps if, as we harvest organs, perhaps harvesting meat is an extension of the ethical arguments herein. But I don't want to put words in your mouth. But just thought.
Yeah, is like Charlton Heston, that film Soylent Green, right? That's sort of the dystopic future where we end up running out of food and they start processing human bodies for creating
Sorry, I was
green.
just about to type that into the comments. Soylent Green. Yes, yeah.
Yeah. But I think most countries and places have got laws against corpse desecration and things like that. So unless those issues get overturned, I don't see a future like that necessarily.
You'd be a very popular activist if that was your cause, Anton.
So, Anton, I mean, the question to you would be is, I mean, would you eat yourself? Would you, I mean, if assuming that all of these things, I mean, it's not outside the realm of possibility.
No, it's not. I mean, all of the stuff that I've written here is technically feasible. The sort of artificial meat technology has advanced leaps and bounds over the last 10 years. They can really do remarkable things. So it is something that could potentially appear on the horizon in the not too distant future. And to answer your question, Gary, is I don't know. It's one of those things until you put in that situation, would you, wouldn't you? I try to create a bit of social pressure as well for the guests, you know,
Yes.
a feeling that you must comply with your host's wishes. And given that kind of social pressure, would you cave, or would you go along with what everybody else is doing around you, or would you remain firm? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because the idea, who was the author, the British journalist, has just written a very good book about food and food technology, and where he talks about brewing bacteria as a meat alternative, you know, because of that. But I mean, so certainly from an environmental perspective, meat is one of the big problems that we have in terms of land clearing and crop usage, etc. So growing meat in a way that is sustainable would obviously be would be a step forward. But growing human meat, I mean, the nutritional value aside, yours is a moral question, if I understand it correctly, in terms of what options. So I liked your point about the more science advances, the more taboos are broken. Because I mean, essentially, what they do in the meal is break the taboos that they've had, because the sort of reason falls away. So I found that a fascinating thing. You know, in my own personal response is that instinctively I want to say no, I wouldn't eat myself, you know, or wouldn't eat anyone else, but I don't have a rational argument. And so that the question then to me is whether morality is just a rational response, or is it something more? But Richard, I see your hand. Go again.
Yes, I was just wondering, would you be willing to eat yourself, or not so much, but a loved one, like your sister or your brother, your mother, your uncle, whatever? I think that would add another level of complexity onto the moral situation. Yeah. Because it's one thing eating yourself, but to think of yourself eating your brother or your mom, that's very, very, very different, I think.
That's true. That's a good question where those taboos originate from, because if you look at the tribes in Papua New Guinea that up until sort of the early parts of the 20th century were still engaging in cannibalism. They would often eat family members who had passed away as a means of making that person part of them, and that their sort of spirit and legacy could live on inside of you. So I think, you know, you can create a story or narrative to support almost any kind of morality in that regard. So yeah, I mean, just in conclusion, because I know we're really up at time, for me, again, it's just about the fact that none of what I've just spoken about in this talk is technically regulated, illegal. So you can make moral appeals to why something like this is wrong, but we can't prevent a person with the means from doing this. And I wrote this more or less as a warning. That at present, this technology is a wide open field and there are no referees on it.
Yeah,
So
so
leave you
it's
with
like
that.
gene manipulation, you know, that you manipulate the genes in terms of children, you know, that you can have the sort of designed children. The technology will ask some really tough questions of us going into the future, and the environmental stuff will put the pressure on it as to resolving it, you know. So Anton, thank you very much. I mean, I think that that's a very thought-provoking. What's that movie, The Chef? The Chef, Myself, or something, where they eat the chef at the end of the Helen Mirren cooks her ex-husband. Um, you know, so I think it's very provocative, you know, in terms of science and the pressure that we have created as humans, where the technology allows us an escape out of the situation that we created, and where the morality then traps us in that. Those are very interesting questions that you've posed with us today. So everyone, thank you very much. Thanks, Anton. Thank you for that. I wish you a good weekend, and I'm not sure I'll ever be able to eat meat in exactly the same way ever again. Thanks, Anton. I really appreciate that.
Bye.
All right, everyone. Thank you very much. Have a good weekend.